Peninsula was founded in Africa. Now, this is also important because another aspect that we always have to be aware of is this notion that Islam is not an African religion. All right? Islam is not an African religion. In the sense of trying to play on the tension that exists today between individuals who are Muslim versus individuals who are not in Africa. And this tension tends to be replicated often for foreign policy purposes, for, anytime that oil is discovered, it seems that there is a local conflict that exists. And therefore, often, rather than thinking what theology people follow, find out which oil company they follow, and you'll get actually to the root of the conflicts rather than the other way around. So in here, what we have is a fully developing community around 614, developing in the area of Ethiopia and being given permission to practice their religion freely. Muslims in North Africa arrived in 660 of the Common Era. So that's North Africa. It is correct to say Islam in North Africa came by means of a military expedition. In Ethiopia, it was a means of political asylum. In North Africa, it was by means of military expedition against predominantly the Byzantine Empire, who had control of much of the territory in North Africa. The arrival in North Africa was very rapid, in a very short period of time, and Muslim armies succeeded in taking most of North Africa, arriving in Morocco in a very short period of time. Another date important for us in relation to Islamic history. Oh, I erased your name, Paul. Okay. Another important year is 7/11. What is 7/11? That's the only place where you get 54-ounce drink, right? It's called the Big Gulp. When the first I saw the Big Gulp, it's like my whole village can actually drink from one Big Gulp. And we'll actually save for the next festival. And I saw somebody just drink a Big Gulp. I said, oh my God. Says, might as well go and buy a 7-Eleven, right? So what is 7/11? It's an important year because that's the Muslim arrival to Spain. So the arrival in Spain, I'm mistaken, the arrival in Spain in 7/11, once again, contrary to our perspective, even though the Muslim arrived in an army to Spain, they were actually an alliance with the Christian forces in the Iberian Peninsula, participating in inner conflict among various Christian dynasties. So once again in here, contrary to another perspective in relation to Muslim arrivals in Spain, it was part of regional conflicts and arriving in there and taking benefit from internal discord and disharmony and allying themselves with one group that allied with them as a way of defeating their opposition. So by 7/11, we have Muslims in Spain, and in a very short period of time, securing most of the Iberian Peninsula. In a very short period of time. Now, thinking that Islam itself as a religion is born around 612. All right, so 612 is when the Prophet proclaims his message of Islam. And by 7/11, Muslims are already in the Iberian Peninsula, securing most of what we think of as the ancient land that extends from Asia, Africa, North Africa, and then going into Spain. In sub-Saharan Africa, so North Africa 660. In sub-Saharan Africa, what we have is that Muslims made their way in sub-Saharan Africa mostly in peaceful, unmilitary, unobtrusive methods. All right? The primary feature in sub-Saharan Africa, in terms of Islam arrival into those territories, was predominantly in peaceful, unobtrusive path or methods. One of the primary features of Islam diffusion into sub-Saharan Africa was by means of merchants, businessmen. So businessmen, merchants who were transacting in sub-Saharan Africa, coming from North Africa into sub-Saharan Africa in trade routes, were one of the primary tools that conversion to Islam and the spread of Islam in sub-Saharan Africa. This actually could be seen also in other areas. Most of the coastal areas in Asia, for example, Malaysia, Indonesia, most of these were actually converted by means of trade, by means of interaction with merchants. Now, why would merchants be an avenue for conversion? That has to be added to the dimension of a rising power. Right? In general, societies as well as communities would try to affiliate and associate themselves with a rising power, because there is a sense that there must be something in there that is either they think of it as superior or think of it as bringing them benefit. At the period we're speaking about in the 7th, 8th, and 9th century, Islam was seen as the rising power. And as such, people wanted to have relationship with, in particular, in terms of money. Right? And that's why both prophets and prophet tends to sound the same. I thought I am believing in the prophet, right? And then I was actually speaking about the prophet to go into my bank. So in a similar way, people were motivated, someone by looking at the rising power, influences by some of the ethics, some of the practices, but human beings tend to be rational and calculating. All right, so basically looking at, should we have relations with this rising power? At a time when this rising power is in controlling of major trade routes, this power is controlling the main waterways. If you want to transport your spices from India, or your ware from China, or from South and Central America, not Central America, South and Central Africa, because America is still, Columbus was not lost yet in his way. All right? You had to find ways for protection, because trade is about protection. Trade is about protection. It's about security. That's why right now, when you have somebody breaks into your electronic devices, right, or your Visa account, and then they go into a Hawaiian vacation, right, it means that the security structure was compromised in the modern era. In the classical earlier period, you need to negotiate with people. You need to find which tribes control the Silk Trade route. It used to be Christians, now they're Muslims. Well, how can we discuss with them securing our caravan that's going to come from their territory? And maybe if we convert to Islam, they'll give us a better deal. That's one way. Now, definitely some people did convert out of thinking of the ethical issues and so on, but that's one way that you secure your trade. Another way also that conversion or Islam is spread in sub-Saharan Africa is by means of marriage. Marriage. Both marriage out of love, but marriage out of convenience too. My dynasty can be empowered if I marry into a power that is to the north of me. They have large armies. They have everything that is available. They could give 100 camel as dowry, right? So you begin to think strategically. Now, this is not unique. Think of all the dynasties in Europe. How did the marriage between various ruling families in Europe took place? Right? To secure their dominion and ally themselves with a stronger power. And by doing so, you make sure that you're always trying to be at the upper hand rather than being the weaker, so you would be taken over by your neighboring power. And the more you are in debt, the more you actually hasten to trying to arrange marriage. Right? Now, even in the contemporary period, we have arranged marriages among certain elite families, not only in third world countries, but in here. Right? We tend to only think of it in certain rudimentary ways. So conversion by means of marriage in sub-Saharan Africa actually was a primary ways that actually individuals entered into Islam. There were conversions that took place from ruling elites. And there's a statement that says, a people follow the religion of their kings. A people follow the religion of their kings. So if the king converts, or the prince converts, then that would influence the larger society. Just think of Christianity and how Christianity became what it is, from being persecuted, then to become the dominant religion in the Roman Empire. Right? So in a similar way, in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa, Islam was diffused by means of conversion among the elite. What we see from Silviana Diouf says, by the 15th century, Islam became the religion of the majority in some parts of West Africa. All right? By the 15th century, Islam became the religion of the majority in some parts of West Africa. Now, we're looking at the 15th century because that begins the process, or the early process of slavery, or the trying to secure slaves from West Africa. So we want to show, or at least go after the evidence of why Silviana Diouf says 10 to 20% of the slaves were of Muslim background. Because we need to look at the areas where slaves were taken from, and by looking at where the areas there are slaves taken from, then taking the numbers and doing a statistical modeling in order to reach for a conclusion of 10 to 20% of the slaves coming from Muslim background. Now, I needed actually to step back a little bit to say that the first slaves to be taken post-1492 or at 1492 actually were Native American slaves, because Columbus took with him samples back with him to show a few of the people that he discovered. So the first group of slaves that usher in the modern New World actually come from this part of the world back into Europe. Right? So we, also in terms of chronology, so before there were African slaves taken from Africa into the New World, there were Native Americans that were taken into Europe as a sample by Columbus himself. So in West Africa, by the 15th century, Islam became the dominant majority religion in parts of West Africa. And in those where Islam was not the majority, Muslim elites were the ruling elites in parts of those countries or those areas where Islam or Muslims were not the majority. We have two cases. Areas where Muslims were the majority by the 15th century. In other parts, Muslims were the elite, the ruling elite, ruling over a majority population that was not Muslim. So you have by the 15th century. By the 15th